Looks like we're at about 28 people, and I know we're expecting quite a few more. So we will give people an opportunity to join over the course of the next couple of minutes before I turn it over to Matt Landy for the introductory slide deck. My name is Lawrence Miller. I have a whole bunch of different touch points to this project and this organization. Do a lot of different stuff with the Sustainable Jobs Fund. I was Secretary of Commerce back in 2011 when my legislature started funding the Working Lands Enterprise Fund. But my role here today is related to Vermont Way Foods. I've spent the last year and a half working with 4 of the food hubs, funders, and other stakeholders as they co-created Vermont Way Foods through the Vermont Food Hub Collaborative. Given that time frame, we've been doing all of this on Zoom. So actually, there's a couple of people involved in this organization that I'm looking forward to meeting in person, who I've grown to know very well. So if you feel like you're in our living room, it's because this has been where we have been spending a lot of time in the last year and a half together. Our goal today is to introduce the concept, but also to hear from you how you see this initiative being most effective for you and any key questions you have. So we will go through, Matt will do a bit of an introduction, and then we'll go through each of the panelists will have a brief presentation, but we're aiming to leave plenty of time for conversations and discussions. I'd like you to remind you keep yourself on mute if you're not speaking. If you are wearing a headset and you get up to go somewhere, being on mute is particularly important, we've all discovered. And if you have questions or comments, but mostly questions, please put them in all caps in the chat. I realize that's shouting. I need you to be yelling to notice. If you're chatting amongst yourselves, feel free to use regular letters, but capitalization will help me identify comments and questions that need to be highlighted. With that, I will turn it over to Matt. Carol, if you would start up the slide deck, introduce yourself, Matt, as well as the organization.
Thank you, Lawrence. Appreciate that. And thanks everyone for being here. So having just returned to Vermont after 12 years of living and working on the West Coast, haven't been to Farm to Plate in a while, and it's truly a pleasure to be here and an honor to be representing Vermont Way Foods. So I'm Matt Landy, as Lawrence said, Director of Brand and Business Development for Vermont Way Foods. Also the only official Vermont Way Foods employee. So we are truly a startup. So I want to start off by saying a few words about my own personal why, which you'll probably hear as a theme from this group, given the stage we're in as a business. So having been blessed with the opportunity to gain valuable experience working in the larger food distribution system, serving in leadership roles on a national scale, visiting farms up and down the West Coast, even as far away as New Zealand. It has only served to illuminate the possibilities here at home in New England above all else. Vermont to me is already a place where our small scale farms and entrepreneurs are more innovative than most of those places that I've come across. Some of that is, of course, climate forced adaptation and resilience. Some is the feedback loop of an unselfish community support network, such as this. I've only been back 3 months now, and I've had experiences unparalleled in my decade plus away, as they say. Every farm I've been on, I've gotten suggestions for 3 more I have to meet or visit, sharing the truly cooperative spirit. And I found that to be a theme with every stakeholder I've come across. There's 3 more people that are highly invested in this project, and then 3 more, and then 3 more. And it's just incredible and humbling. So as my family and I have moved back to Vermont during a global pandemic and the most competitive housing market, and at least in my own lifetime that I can think of, and we are housed officially, although still sleeping on camping mats in a makeshift office. All this for the sake of this vision, which I hope you all come to be as excited about as I, through this presentation and in the coming weeks and years. I remain humbled by the opportunity to serve Vermont and by the sheer volume of stakeholder support for Vermont Way Foods. So that's my enthusiastic introduction. And again, thank you all for the opportunity to present here today. I think we might be ready for the next slide. It is from that cooperative spirit that Vermont Way Foods was born, conceptualized as a non-extractive model for supporting Vermont farms and food businesses. Our 30,000-foot vision is to incentivize the vitality of a diverse working landscape here in the state of Vermont by cultivating additional opportunities for Vermont-produced goods, both within Vermont and in our southern markets, the larger markets to our south. We seek to highlight the core values of integrity, consciousness, and community present in many Vermont agricultural producers and entrepreneurs. I kind of titled this slide "Strength and Structure" in my notes here, and there's a good reason for that. Our model is an L3C, which is a so-called low profit LLC. Well, officially is that. Was set up and conceptualized by these four nonprofits, which you see here, two of which you'll hear from shortly when Catherine and John have an opportunity to share their remarks. It's wholly unique and focused only on adding value for Vermont producers above all else. The work these four organizations are doing in literally every corner of the state, which this map illustrates quite well, from work in schools and institutions, farm business planning, food access programs, logistical support for producers, providing incubator space for emerging food businesses, even a native plant nursery. The list is substantial and represents what I would see as any corporate brand's dream of a purpose-driven marketing opportunity. If you could see my air quotes. You hear the term people over profit. You hear the term triple bottom line. They're batted around a lot these days. But I'd say Vermont Way Foods and our stakeholders truly represent purpose first and foremost. And that's something quite unique about the structure here. And it's really meant to create a feedback loop of supporting Vermont. Carol. So I think we kept this slide in here because pigs are cute, but it's related to the next slide as well. Basically setting us up to share just how hungry folks are across the Northeast, at least in our research and the study done by the Vermont Food Hub Collaborative for Vermont product. So if it's all about Vermont, why go south, you might ask? Well, one of the quandaries of our working landscape is the relative size of our population. As this slide illustrates, with 31% of the farmland and just 4% of the population here in New England, supporting the continued vitality of our working landscape may require this sort of expansive strategy. While we know well that a few notable and breakout brands, and of course our beloved maple syrup as a category, have largely enjoyed such success already. Vermont Way Foods is working to facilitate a cohesive, interconnected mechanism for creating such market opportunities for producers of all sizes and access a host of categories and across a host of categories. If our vision plays out, which we certainly hope it does, a higher percentage of producers can not only share in the success, but we can also work collaboratively to shorten supply chains up and down the Northeast. We're even here in Vermont we see Washington apples, Minnesota winter squash, prominently displayed in October in some of our stellar markets. See here alone, I mean, there's some pretty good stats on here. I mean, 36 times the population of Vermont, just in the New York City metro area. So, you know, this is where a lot of the work went in developing this concept. Go ahead, Carol, sorry. Thank you. So prior to conceptualizing Vermont Way Foods, the Vermont Food Hub Collaborative invested in the metro market study to determine how what we term the cultural compassionate eater might respond to the Vermont being used or associated with their food choices. As you can see from this slide, this group represents a significant amount of population. In fact, 1 in 4 in the Northeast. They happen to idealize the state of Vermont. And I'd say, in my humble opinion, this isn't really much of a stretch, but maybe I'm a little bit biased, of course. But it also means that we really don't have to tell a lot of lies to represent this food. It's, you know, it's something that these folks are resonating with. And you can see here in some of the quotes below, which are indeed real people who were willing to talk to us, or at least talk to the folks who were working on this before my arrival, during the global pandemic while they were at home, and, you know, spending hours on the phone discussing this project. And, you know, before these discussions were had, of course, there was kind of the hard research that, you know, looked at what these folks care about as far as making their food choices and the size of the market, which you see also represented on this slide. So, you know, these are a lot of the same segment of consumers shopping at farmers markets, natural food stores, buying directly from farm stands, spread out all across the Northeast. They are seeking access to anything Vermont. I think I'm ready, Carol. Okay. So this slide is really just an example of how we might approach the market and kind of a taste of what's on our current website. Thus far during my time visiting with producers over the last several months, I've largely found a lot of this to be a lot more than a marketing ploy. You know, in my experience, I can't really think of any place else that I've been standing in a pasture where a herd of cattle would come when they are called. And in fact, not just like walk over, like frolicking toward their human keeper. Perhaps they didn't know what their fate was, but either way, they were having a pretty good life out there. And, you know, to me, it was just one of those moments of, yeah, you know, what we're doing is quite real. And maybe a lot of folks on this call already know that, but, you know, as we go to communicate this to folks that don't have access to the visuals we might have every day as we drive by our neighbor's farm or go visit the farm stand, you know, we're going to use some of this to tell a story and to help support Vermont farms. Producer stories and ongoing viability are really central to what Vermont Way Foods is all about. Carol, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. This is a little bit more about how we might approach the market, plus a high-level view of how our work, much of which builds upon what our member food hubs are already engaged in, might play out. You know, so you can see, you know, a lot of focus on food access, trust, transparency, simplification of logistical issues, aggregation, and then a little bit about our high-level goals. I mean, really, it's no less ambitious than, you know, I had the opportunity on the West Coast to work with, you know, many of like the early adopters of the organic agricultural trade, who really started in the 70s at a time when,
Hey, Chad,
when they were being laughed off of farms, laughed out of supermarkets, and they held on to their vision, which was no less ambitious than changing the food system. I think as we've evolved, we've kind of seen things, in a little bit more of a complex manner. And now we have an opportunity here where I see this as one of our high-level vision / goals for a different kind of food system. So, it's Vermont-based. Success stays here. What's best for Vermont farmers and makers and our land and communities is what we're planning to do. We're going to focus on food sovereignty, knowing that as we support the working landscape, the more we do that, the more we'll be able to do here. And then, of course, as we have success, it opens up more opportunity for others within Vermont.
Yeah. No, I'm not looking to you. I was asking if there's something you want to try to fit in to do together. That's all.
Abby, could you put yourself on mute?
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you.
Just a little bit about our, we're still very much in the development phase with our offering. And, we kind of plan to explore just about every agricultural category as we hit the market and assess need, and including categories that right now might not be very prominent in Vermont, as we're currently talking with producers and networking and, discovering opportunities around things like grains, where we might have some, take a look at things that haven't traditionally been an export product or even a product prominent and locally grown here in Vermont. So we are currently going through that process. And go to the next slide, Carol. We can kind of offer a visual of maybe what the brand might look like. Put a lot of work into design, and you can see we just kind of mocked up some potential branded products for you all to see, and a truck. And of course, I love talking about this. So my contact information's here. I'm sure it's readily available in a lot of places. Whether you want to poke holes in the idea or become a supporter or find out how you can take part or buy product, anything, the whole plethora. I like all those conversations, especially at this stage of the game. I think every single conversation is valuable, and I learn from every single one of them. So thanks again for the opportunity to kind of share with you today. And of course, we'll have a question and answer session later, and we can ask here now.
Thank you, Matt.
Got it.
I'm going to turn next to Gay Symington. As I do, I just want to acknowledge the role that High Meadows has played on the landscape and in farm to plate over the last number of years. This is a really notable transition point for High Meadows, as you all probably are aware. High Meadows has been a strong supporter of the Food Hub Collaborative, this group moving towards Vermont Way Foods, along with all of the other work they have done. It's just been extraordinary, and Gay's participation in public policy in this particular area has been really significant. So I just wanted to say thank you first and foremost before I turn it over to you. And you have watched the emergence of this effort. You funded it for a reason. So if you could introduce yourself and why you have supported this project, that'd be great.
Thank you. I've got my notes over the mute, and so I almost launched without even unmuting. Yeah, thanks, Matt, for that introduction. And I'm gonna, Lawrence asked us to talk about why we're supporting this work or why we're engaged in this work. And I'm gonna talk from the perspective of High Meadows about why we focus on the food system to begin with, and then why Vermont Way Foods. And then I'll talk just briefly about what my personal why is, And, 3 out of 5 times I do that without starting to cry. So hopefully this will be one of those. So throughout its 16 years, High Meadows has focused, as Lawrence said, on promoting Vermont food and farm and food-based enterprises that grow food in a way that is environmentally sustainable. And our why behind that is because healthy and vibrant farms are key to Vermont's rural communities and to our cities and villages. Farms provide the open space that Vermonters value and that our tourists come here to see. It's also because producing food closer to home is important, both for reducing our vulnerability to disruptions in that global food supply chain Matt spoke of, and for reducing the carbon footprint of our food system. And third, because the current agricultural economy that's so important to us is fragile. It's really reliant on large-scale conventional dairy where farmers are at the mercy of a national cheap food pricing structure. And that makes it really challenging to build soil health and provide livable wages to farm workers as you're also producing food. So High Meadows sees an opportunity for a different, more resilient and less vulnerable farm economy that builds community resilience to disruption, treats farmers and farm workers and food system workers and eaters with respect, and grows crops in a way that builds soil and avoids pollution and delivers nutritious food to the people who want to eat it. So then you ask, why invest in this collaborative approach to creating and delivering on a value-driven brand through a collaborative enterprise of nonprofit food hubs? Why start with the nonprofit sector? And one of the whys there is because food hubs have missions. These 4 food hubs have clear missions. They're serving both farmers and communities of eaters. They want to grow the number of viable local farms. And to do that requires connecting producers with markets where consumers are willing to pay for food that's grown with respect for the land and water and for the people who work the land and deliver food to the market. And second, because the leading food hubs in Vermont, in those food hubs, we saw a desire to move more food from more farms and a willingness to grow with discipline and attention to cost efficiency and food safety and respectful treatment of food system workers. And third, because this requires a tolerance for doing and willingness to do business differently, which is risky in the food distribution industry. That's an industry that's under stress. Just as one example, we want to disrupt the dynamic of shifting risk and cost to producers in order to drive consumer prices down. But Vermont Way Foods still has pricing constraints in order to be viable. And lastly, because if Vermont Way Foods succeeds, it offers the potential to grow beyond these 4 founding food hubs and to nudge the traditional food distribution system to operate differently. Speaking for myself, food matters, how it's grown, how it moves to market, who gets access to healthy food choices. My first job after college, which was ages ago, I acknowledge, was in a natural food store, at a moment in time when you could not find whole grain bread in the market. And in the store, I would go there was a deli, and I would go into the deli after they shut down for lunch, and I would make a ton of bread by hand. I was strong at the time. And eventually we converted the deli into a bakery. And I got to experience the joy of producing food that was nutritious. And I also got to experience the joy of eaters realizing their doctor's orders to change their diet was a window into eating delicious food, not a prescription for eating Brillo for the rest of their lives. So, behind Vermont Way Foods' many meetings and spreadsheets and grant proposals and long days for food hub managers and farmers and truck drivers, I see that joy at work, the joy of getting great food from farm to market in a way that's good for people and for soil. That's my why.
And that level of passion is why you've been effective. Thank you for being fully here. Catherine. Catherine is Executive Director of Green Mountain Farm to School, one of the 4 founding food hubs. Catherine?
Thanks, Lawrence. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay. I recognize most of the names registered and do see some familiar faces on the screen. I appreciate you being here with us today. And for those that I haven't met, I'm Catherine Cusack, like Lawrence said, from Green Mountain Farm to School, based out of Newport. I've been with the organization for just over 8 years. And in that time, I've been witness to a tremendous amount of fortitude, ingenuity, and integrity in support of the Vermont local food system. Jake mentioned some of those same qualities in his opening remarks this morning. And it's like, oh, wait, no, I'm saying that later. So I think we all agree and believe in those things. And it continues to be amazing and exciting and powerful. 2 things I don't get to talk about often is one, that I was a future farmer of America, enrolled in the animal technology program in Wallingford, Connecticut, out of Lyman Hall High School decades ago, and also participated in 4-H for many years. Second is that I got my start in farm school working as a chronic disease prevention specialist for the Vermont Department of Health, and initiated one of the first worksite CSAs in the area, as well as worked with corner stores to offer fresh produce. And then maybe a third thing is that my graduate degree is in health promotion. And so I come at this work from a variety of angles. There's food access and health, and then an affection for animal husbandry and farming. At the top of the list of what drives me is allowing for choice and good food access. And that has been the crux of GMFTS's mission for over a decade. The Vermont Food Hub Collaborative has helped us to strengthen systems, create efficiencies, and open up opportunities for producers and consumers alike. I am also a mom of school-aged children and appreciate a fresh school meal, and a fresh school meal that's prepared in a well-supported kitchen and a well-supported community, I think is what's most important to me. And I wanted to see our communities thrive, or I want to see our communities thrive. What we have in Vermont around local food has the power to bring us together and raise us up. And so then that brings me back to the collective impact model of the Farm to Plate network, and what that has provided. And that has provided this data-driven framework for how to do just that, how to build a resilient local food system. I looked back at my notes to a meeting that Ellen and Jake facilitated a few years ago, and they asked us to look at the plan, the new plan, and identify which strategic priorities our organizations are or could address. And I looked keeping both Vermont Way Foods and Green Mountain Farm to School in mind, and checked a total of 7. And that was really reassurance to me that we were headed in the right direction, that what we're focusing on and the work we're doing is helping to move the resiliency of Vermont's food system forward. Because that plan and the work that the Farm to Plate Network has done is just jam-packed with really factual information. So I feel that Vermont Way Foods is positioned to build a resilient food system that's really grounded in the principles of collaboration, innovation, and integrity. The Vermont way, if I may. We are going beyond shipping food, and we're building relationships based on trust and transparency that are allowing us to engage with farmers and customers on a very personal level. To survive and thrive, a local food system needs to be nimble, and the 4 nonprofits that have banded together have created efficiencies, increased access, onboarded new producers, advised, marketed, and sold Vermont food for decades. We are drawing from our experiences and our learning as we launch Vermont Way Foods. And then and most importantly, and why I think that this is such a powerful initiative, is that we're driving dollars into the remote corners of the state, and that we are economic drivers for small farms and small communities. Those communities that we're all so proud to raise our family in and live consciously in and be creative. Those communities that also attract out-of-state dollars that help our state flourish. We have seen significant growth in sales in our small retail partners and full service farm stands. And we saw this prior to the pandemic, but we are seeing it even more because of the pandemic. The partnerships that have been fostered through this initiative are allowing us to meet the market demand and create a ripple effect on our local economies. Working with Vermont Way Foods and working with the Food Hub Collaborative and creating Vermont Way Foods has resonated with me on the power of the collective good. And that is my why.
Excellent, thank you. Next, I'll turn to John Ramsey. John is the member most likely to send a quick email saying, can't quite make it on time, gotta go move the cows. John, would you introduce yourself and your why?
Thanks, Lawrence. You're you're outing me in front of everyone in terms of how I get out of meetings, and it's okay. Well, thank you. Good to be with all of you this afternoon. And Lawrence, your little intro there is a segue to my why. The Center for Agricultural Economy is a food systems hub based in Hardwick, providing technical assistance, infrastructure, education, and resources to farm and food businesses across the local and regional and statewide level in different ways. As Lawrence alluded to, I come to this work as a farmer. I grew up dairy farming. I have been a lifelong farmer myself. I've been the primary operator and manager of our farm since 2001. And that's when we transitioned our farm from dairy to dairy heifers and beef, and then eventually to all beef. I know the challenges it is when you are operating an enterprise and you switch your business model entirely. The struggle to hang on to the land that you've worked really hard to acquire, the ability to afford it, and the ability to cash flow that new enterprise. So that really roots me in the work that I do and the relationship that I have with farmers. And I see that Vermont Way Foods is a real opportunity for some farmers. We should really celebrate and look at all of the accomplishments that Vermont has made in local food systems and local food over the past couple of decades. But there are still people out there, people in our communities, and also people who are farming who are wondering, how do I engage in the local food system? How do I participate? Vermont Way Foods is a mechanism by which some people might start participating who haven't had the opportunity to otherwise. Right now, as an example, some of our staff are working with a family that was operating a MFO dairy operation, and they're working on an intergenerational transfer. And they're also working on transitioning their business model and developing new enterprises on that fairly large farm. It's a really complicated process. And we started a conversation with them around the potential of working with Vermont Way Foods. And while Vermont Way Foods doesn't represent the entirety of the solution to some of their challenges, it does offer an opportunity to engage and to potentially scale up some of these new enterprises they're looking at. So that really, again, sort of brings you back to the why and the why that we're doing all of this. We have a remarkable group of farmers across this state who I believe are ready to engage when market opportunities present themselves. Gay spoke about the fact that a lot of dairy farms in particular are in a situation where the market is so extractive on themselves and their land and their animals. This is an opportunity to bring some of that value back to these farms and you know, really celebrate the work that they're doing every day as great stewards of the land. Another point I want to just talk about briefly is the fact that in my last 2 years as being the ED at the Center for Agricultural Economy, I've seen the relationships between these organizations really grow to a point where I think about you know, these folks who we're working with as like true collaborators. Not only are we working on the Vermont Way Foods work together, but through the pandemic, this group of organizations has worked together on the USDA Farmers Feeding Families Phase 1 and 2. They've come together and we've all participated in the Everyone Eats program. We're seeing the ways in which you can build markets for farms, but also leverage opportunities for food access and bring, you know, a whole nother suite of services and values back to a community by doing this work. So thank you to all of the hubs that are participating in this work. This is one scope of work that we're participating in together. Like I said, there's several others around food access, food security, food sovereignty. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, John. This issue that you closed on about how all of these efforts relate is key to why Farm to Plate exists. And, you know, if Vermont Way Foods is successful, there's a whole bunch of other supporting infrastructure and other elements of the supply chain that are going to be necessary to realize this opportunity for a whole bunch of participants. I'm going to turn to Carol next. I started my business career when I was way too young to know how difficult building a brand was. And I started in consumer products with Otter Creek Brewing. And I came to understand my favorite definition of a brand is the promise of a consistent experience. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a really high quality experience. It just means it's going to be consistent. So it becomes a shorthand, a habit by which somebody can make a selection. And you can create demand and you can create responsiveness for something that people might not be otherwise familiar. And to do that well really benefits from a depth of expertise. And we've been very lucky to have Carol participating on this project together with FM Munoz and a couple of others to put it on a data basis and to really have a strong foundation. One of the reasons this project exists is to create a brand that no individual small enterprise could create on its own. And that part is really important. So we'll get into some other stuff, but I just wanted to bring a focus onto why that participation is so important. And also to have the perspective of somebody in a marketing position who's also on the Grass Farmers Board. So Carol, take it away.
Thanks, Lawrence. Yes, I come at this from a different angle, the marketing angle. My background is in advertising. I started out at Saatchi & Saatchi Advertising, and then I was the VP of Innovation for Pepperidge Farm for many years. They offered an early retirement, and I grabbed it and ran for the door to move to Vermont. Couldn't wait to get here. And since I've been here, I've been helping small businesses and farmers tell their stories. Vermont Land Trust, brewers, they're a wide gamut of things. And I'll talk a little more about that. And yes, I have the honor of serving on the Vermont Grass Farmers Board. So I moved to Vermont for a reason. Yes, it starts with it's a beautiful place. It takes my breath away when I drive around Vermont, but it was mainly because of the values of the people that I met here. I was struck by the number of people doing the right thing for the environment, for their animals, for their neighbors, people in my life, in my words, leading a life of meaning, which was in sharp contrast to, I'd say, my soul-sucking experience in the corporate world. So really happy to be here in Vermont. And when I first came, I started the TA route of with some gracious small grants, working with individual farmers and makers. And I would pour my heart into it. And we'd work out this whole, here's what your story is, a marketing plan. And I observed a pattern that then the season would hit and the farmers would need to get back to farming and the makers would need to go back to filling orders. And we watched the momentum on some of these projects taper off. And I kept saying to myself, there's got to be a way to have a greater impact to help more businesses in Vermont. So did some work with the Center for Ag Economy, as well as down in Mad River Valley, some work of videos telling maker stories there. And FM, as Lawrence mentioned, FM Unas, I had the pleasure of being able to work with him. And we were asked to come up with a strategy of how we could grow Vermont food outside of Vermont. And we researched this and we were in awe of what we found. This is the way marketing should be done, that you find something that people actually want and you marry that up with what you actually do. And when that authenticity can happen, that's when you've got magic. It's just telling your real story and people care about that. That's why big corporations buy up small businesses and they try to fake it, but there is nothing about this that's faking it. When we went into the market and talked to people and they just said, we started out talking about this is food done in an entirely different way. They said, no, that's not what Vermont would do. Vermont never lost its way. It's been making food the way it should be made forever. They take their time, they craft it, they grow it the right way so it's good for the land. They would, of course, take care of their neighbors. They have a really positive impression of Vermont. And I think if anything, during COVID, that passion has gotten even greater. Living up here in the Northeast Kingdom, if I drive through Stowe, the droves of tourists that are walking the streets, as well as we know the housing market is getting swept up by people sight unseen buying homes here. In essence, the Vermont brand, food brand, already exists in their mind. They believe what the brand stands for. They want a piece of what we have here in Vermont. So I'm personally extremely passionate about this opportunity. I've been there at the ground floor working with the team to help shape this. It's going to be a tough road. We don't have everything figured out. It's logistics abound with this, and I'm sure many of you have questions on that. But do we view this as something that has a good shot to help all boats rise and help more than one player? Absolutely. We think there's a huge opportunity here. So we can't wait to talk more about it.
Thank you. With that, we will turn over to discussion and Q&A. And so I would invite people to, if you want to just go direct rather than through the chat, make yourself visible, take yourself on mute, raise your hand, any of those tools work. I'll start with a question from Annie Rawl. This is to Matt. Could you talk about the Vermont Way market strategy? Is it primarily an export model, or is there some work happening for coordination among in-state markets?
Thank you, Lawrence, and thank you, Annie. We definitely are not turning away from opportunity here in Vermont. I mean, I think while the focus of this project and the research centered around the more populous southern markets, we are very cognizant of the fact that, if there's an opportunity to have more Vermont food stay in Vermont and not duplicate or replace other Vermont supply lines that are already happening within Vermont, then of course we would want to increase sales within Vermont, right? So for example, if we are shortening a supply chain rather than competing with our neighbor or a farm direct relationship or something one of the food hubs already has in place, then certainly we would love to do that. That would be the first priority. So, but we're just looking at some of those statistics and seeing that, of course, there will be the likelihood that there'll be some opportunity out of state if we find saturation here. But by no means are we fully saturated from what I can see. And I'm sure many agree.
I think, for a little color on the origin, there's one of the primary goals here is to increase farm gate margin. So it is to, a big part in my mind is to bring back the market intelligence as to what people are looking for in those out-of-state markets, as well as in-state, where that information isn't necessarily getting to the producer, and make sure that information is getting there with enough advance notice to do something about it, but not necessarily have a rush into a particular product. We saw the destruction of a lot of hemp, for example. This isn't about necessarily creating freight trains to hop on, but in terms of establishing durable supply chains. And I see a number of people from Salvation Farms on here. The way I think about it too is there's a stratification of making sure that no food goes to waste. And as we put stuff into a premium market, make sure that we are also not letting food slip away from the system. John, Center for an Ag Economy has value-added production as well as food hub distribution, as well as participating in food security. Could you talk a little bit about your perspective on the balance of outlets for the suppliers that you work with?
Well, I think that there's been obviously an increase in in-state markets as the pandemic has unfolded, particularly with smaller stores and farm stands. We've seen sort of a real increase there. We saw a real decrease initially in institutional buying, obviously at the start of the pandemic, but that has rebounded very strongly. Also, the labor shortages right now are creating a demand for prepared value-added products. We're basically at capacity right now. I think that I see Lottie is on here. She's our program manager for Just Cut. I think this year we'll process upwards of 180,000 or a little bit more than that pounds of produce that we source from farms and prep that for use in institutional kitchens. And I think, Matt, you're seeing across that landscape a demand for that prepared value-added product. So yeah, I think that some pandemic and certainly some of the labor issues are driving some of the demand for certain products.
Catherine and then Secretary Tibbetts.
Excuse me. Thanks, Lawrence. I just wanted to add a little on the diversification of markets for producers. And so Green Mountain Farm to School operates Green Mountain Farm Direct, and we have had, really, I think, good success in serving institutional markets. And institutions in our public schools, primarily our public schools. And I think, price point is always a challenge in those types of institutions and purchasing local food. But I think one of the reasons why Farm Direct has been successful is because the farmers that we're working with have a diversity of markets that they're serving. They're not just relying on Farm Direct to meet their sales goals, but because they have these, CSAs or other wholesale markets or whatever their other opportunities are, like the more they thrive and contribute to the overall farm viability, the more that farm is able to offer farm direct, a price point that is attractive to our institutions, which just helps us with food access and, hopefully can extend into the charitable food system. And we've seen a little shift with the charitable food system and accessing food through farm direct because of the pandemic, and hope that that will continue. But I think it's really like one of the benefits that I see, long-term benefits of Vermont Way Foods is, really helping to drive dollars to our farms that can then, be maybe a little more flexible when we're trying to address food insecurity needs or work within the charitable food system.
Thanks. Anson, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you all. It's been a great discussion, and I appreciate your leadership on this. And it's a great opportunity, I think, to move forward on a number of fronts here if we can figure this out. Yay, thank you for your leadership. I've had some of your bread, and it was very good back in the day, some of your homemade bread. So there, and I've also probably had too many English muffins from Pepperidge Farm. So, but the Pepperidge Farm ones aren't bad either. Little cabot butter on them. Anyway, walk me through this. If I'm a farmer, how do I participate? Say I'm growing beets. How do I participate, and why would I want to participate in something like this? Is the Vermont Way a separate brand, or are you aggregating Vermont food and then gonna ship it out under Vermont Way under a brand?
Matt, why don't you go ahead and lean into that, and others can follow up.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So, multi-part question. I'll start off with kind of the why part. So, or actually I'll address the brand part first. So the brand is a tool. And the way I see this is that there's still an interest in source identification at the consumer level that we have to recognize. And we are not like staunch necessarily about the physical brand as the only way to participate. So I probably should have made that clear at the beginning. However, we do see it as a valuable tool for unification of the supply chain, especially as we approach larger retailers who might be looking for consistency. So I think hopefully that answers that part of the question, where it's just not a singular model. So really it's starting with a conversation. Right now, we're heading into the winter planting time for most veg crops. So, if beets being the example, I've already kind of been on several farms and have been in discussions about kind of the seed purchase timeline. And really what we're looking to do is put together a list to go to market with, an actual list with product behind it, that we can feel confident that we have the support of the producer with some, I'd say it's the fairly critical part of that discussion is, from my perspective, is producer return and where that comfort level is, so that I can go to market with a real price expectation. So right now, to participate, it's about being in conversation so we can have a discussion. And we're in those planning stages right now with multiple producers, and would welcome more because it's of all sizes. And I think that's part of our discussion. I say the why is we're trying to create a non-extractive model, which is the term that I'm using for it, is that this is one where you have 4 Vermont entities that are institutions around the state here in the food system. They're all nonprofits. They've invested in this L3C. The money's staying in Vermont. It's going to be a transparent relationship where we're going to have real discussion about your needs as a producer, but also real discussion about our own challenges as small organizations working to create the logistics necessary to take product to market. We're all going to be evolving together in this as the process goes on. So, it takes that mindset of transparency to participate. And we're committed to that. So I hope that helps to answer the question a bit.
Sure, just a quick follow-up. So who's going to buy this? And I'm sure you've done the market research on it. So who's your consumer here that's outside of Vermont that's going to want to jump on board here and go the Vermont way?
I think yeah, go ahead, Lawrence.
I was going to say, this may be a good time for Carol to hop in and talk about some of the data work that was done early on to assess that. And then I'll come back with another couple of thoughts about the mechanics of aggregation. Go ahead.
Okay.
Hanson, our research would show us that there's a group of people in Boston and New York in the metro markets that what we've found out is they're the people who care about what the food is, the quality of it, that it's something that would feel fresh and natural and something that they'd like to cook a great meal from, married with the idea of the values that go with it that we've spoken of at length. They exist. They're 24% of consumers in the Northeast market ascribe to those set of values of what they're looking for in their food and what they expect from their brand. We went into it thinking this might be a younger phenomena. This might be a hipsters, if you will, type of thing that it attracts. And that's not true at all. We have demographics that show there's a big group of people in their 30s, and there's equally as large of a group in their 50s and early 60s that really are strongly wedded to this idea of what they're looking for in their food. And we have more information behind that of what are these people, what are they doing, what are their activities, what are they involved in? So when we get to the point of marketing, we can be where we can find these people and speak to them. So it's men, women, it's not one answer of it's one demographic and one slice. It's more values driven is what we've found. So.
And I think that speaks a little bit to the notion of this entity as a aggregator. And so we talk about who might be interested in selling through this market. I think of people who might be diversifying what they grow, but not necessarily prepared to go out and figure out a new market. People who want to stay at the farm don't want to go out and spend a lot of time finding the customers. And conversely, we've got producers who are small enough that trying to access some of those larger purchasers or get into the market, they're going to be constrained by size and requirements. And this is a way of aggregating larger volumes to be able to go have more serious conversations with big buyers in those other markets and spread that risk among a number of growers and meet a combination of needs. Is a little bit of what is in my brain at any rate. Annie Harlow asks, can you explain how you're prioritizing product categories as you engage in conversations to onboard producers based on the early research? Produce, meat, cheese, manufactured, etc. And I'll say, Annie, you are asking a question that is the key topic of conversation through this winter as to what that right mix needs to look like. And obviously, getting the right blend of value and margin, value by weight and cube on a truck is really important for the economics to work. And we have deferred that conversation about definition of specific product categories until Matt was hired and could come on and take that conceptual level and really spend a lot of time with the humans that are involved in making these judgments. Matt, do you have anything to add for Annie's question?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And agree, that has been a lot of the early work here in Vermont Way Foods is, and I guess the way I've approached it is, always look for anchors and, kind of considering what we already do well as a state as a starting point. So as you talk about produce, as you talk about cheese, I think, it's fairly critical for us to get off on the right foot if we are to approach larger buyers. And so ensuring that we have consistent supply lines is a critical first step. So but as far as like, you know, when would be open to expanding the product line going forward continuously, you know, depending on it, you know, as we assess the market and come back with needs. But we have to start with something. You have to have a core list to go meet with a buyer. So we have to come up with things that we're already doing pretty well and, you know, kind of move from there. So that is our kind of our beginning strategy. But as Lawrence said, that's what we're spending our winter doing, is curating.
And Carissa Bruton asks, you know, Vermont, or observes Vermont's a state full of small farms. As we heard in the first session, regenerative farms tend to stay smaller in order to fulfill their values and goals in farming in relationship with the land and its natural strengths and capacity. Will Vermont Way Foods brand support small farms like it will support larger farms? Do small Vermont farms have the capacity to meet the demand of large urban areas? And that goes a little bit to what I talked about in terms of the aggregation capacity and being able to bring small producers together who might not individually have the capacity to address a larger demand to market. Catherine, you've got a number of small producers in your area. Do you want to add anything to what I had to say?
Yes, I was reading ahead. The intention is to, like Carol said, help all boats rise. So we most certainly want to represent our smaller farms. I think smaller farms, you know, are working with less human capacity, less resources, like the question states, you know, really invest in regenerative practices and don't have maybe the bandwidth or the inclination to market themselves, own trucks, right? Come up with a brand. So I think this is the ideal situation for a small farm that is focused on regenerative practices, where that, you know, under this brand, and we haven't flushed all of this out yet. Matt has started some of the work around identifying, you know, what would qualify you, and I hesitate to use that word, but what would qualify you to source through the Vermont Way brand. And so that type of farm, you know, would certainly fit the initial definition that we're working with, or the initial attributes that we've been discussing. So I think that's the ideal, like the big, larger farms with more capacity, more resources, more bandwidth, probably don't need Vermont Way Foods as much as the smaller farms do.
And I will say too, you know, this isn't just Q and A, this is an opportunity for anybody to make observations about what you think farms and small value added producers need. And this is also an opportunity to let Matt, Catherine, John, and Carol know what they're going to need to be thinking about for this to be successful for all involved. Andrew asks a great infrastructure question about distributed infrastructure versus what needs to be built. Andrew asks, if I understand correctly, a part of the plan for Vermont Way Foods is to aggregate products from various farms under the brand. Does Vermont Way Foods plan to also have a distribution center and take charge of distribution, or does it intend to contract with the existing food hubs and or other distributors, or both? John, you've got this wonderfully complex organization already. You might be best positioned to tackle this.
Yeah. It's all of it. Each of the hubs has infrastructure and some capacity. Each of the hubs is looking at where we would add capacity to aggregate and distribute food. But we're also talking to existing partners who are already going to these metro areas and, you know, looking to, build relationships with them as well. Because, you know, over time, we're going to need those partnerships in order to do this and be successful. So yeah, no, it's both. Vermont Way Foods, the intention right now is not for Vermont Way Foods to own trucks or manage warehouses, but to really rely on the hubs and other distributors who are doing this already.
Thank you.
Ellen, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
About the co-branding?
Yeah.
Yeah, just sort of wondering how you guys are thinking about that. You know, you get the Deep Root Organic Co-op, they have their lead brand, or like Red Tomato, for instance, either Eco Apples program, but then you have the individual farm part of it with a Jasper Sellers co-brand. Is that what you're envisioning here?
Matt?
Yes. So I think that's pretty accurate at this point. I think the ultimate concern here is where are we adding value with the brand? So if we're in a situation where the brand is adding value, we're looking to deploy it and without losing the source ID. And so I think that's where you have the little co-brand aspect of it. I mean, I think that's really critical. But you know, we're right now just kind of talking about different ways to utilize the brand. And I think there's a number of ways to deploy it while maintaining the source ID. And yeah, I could see both playing out. I think that is a good example, Ellen, of how we could use it.
Annie Harlow, would you like to unmute and hop on with your piece about the challenges of grocers?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I was just kind of thinking about the buyers at the regional supermarkets. So early on, I think it was Carol who said regarding the research that there's strong consumer demand in the Northeast regional market for Vermont products. But I'm wondering what level of research was undertaken studying at the store level. So I imagine, I'm not sure, but I imagine part of this emphasis would be working with independently owned stores rather than the large internationally owned stores. And a lot of times buyers are cautious about giving up existing shelf space for unproven products. And we also know that buyers will drop slow sellers on a dime. And the way that some stores are set up, some of the buyers actually don't even have as much freedom as we would like to think that they do. And so, because it all comes down to kind of data-driven and analytics and things like that. And so I'm just kind of wondering, I don't know if this goes to Carol or John or who, but yeah, just kind of curious at this level. Thanks.
I'm going to ask Carol to speak to the grounding question about evaluation. And also, Carol, if you could just touch on some of the complications with using data when we're going to market like this. And, you know, Nielsen's and Simmons is great, but it's got some limitations around what you can look at for independents versus big chains. And then after Carol has a chance to talk about this issue, Matt, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about some of your experience with buyers.
Okay, so just there's several questions layered in there, Annie, and I'm glad you're asking them. So we don't have specific research with buyers, but that's part of this next phase of going out and having exploratory conversations. And you're absolutely spot on. From the data we have of where these people shop, independently owned grocers would make a lot of sense. Those smaller chains in New England versus going to the big nationals. And we do know, both Matt and I have been exposed to this in our selling experience in the branded world. Many of these retailers want more local products. And if anything, you know, COP26, all the things that are in the news right now, everyone's talking about the idea of how do you change the food system and the distance it travels. Chains like Big Y, we know that they're very big on their local program. Perhaps if we're able to fold into some of their efforts, that would be terrific. Hannaford's, I know Matt's already in conversation, planning conversations to have with them. So we're going to marry up, where do these people shop? They don't like the big box stores. They don't like the large chains, and marry that up with what are we capable of covering in capacity. And you're absolutely right. You have to deliver turns in order to stay in the store. You have to prove your success. Much of the conversation, and Matt, please share your thoughts on this, and many of them may be to test our way in, like to give us a store or two in their chain, and we're able to prove the movement of it. And then you can roll that out and also amp up your supply of it as well. And lastly, Lawrence, layering on the data, yes, it is a challenge to get the finite Northeast market, but we actually we're on to something now where we may be able to get some really efficient data to give us more of a lay of the land of our competition, and go to market with more market intelligence. So Matt, I'm sure there's more you'd want to layer on top of that. So.
Yes, thank you, Carol. Yeah, so I think that's where a lot of this curation process comes in, Annie, is that we're really trying to ensure that we have a unique selling proposition that's we talked about adding value for producers. Well, it's really the same thing when I'm approaching a buyer. And, you know, I've always found an anchor product is, you know, that early hook to at least get someone's interest. But I agree with Carol. I mean, I think we have to start with probably the most manageable open markets, where maybe it's there's the corner store movement. I know we have the general store movement here in Vermont, but I mean, I was reading the other day in Eater about the corner store movement in more metro areas, where it's a very carefully curated variety of products and likely the type of store where the shoppers that we've had discussions with would be shopping. So while I am thinking big, like as in, yes, the Wegmans of the world and the Hannafords, I think there's a proving ground that there's a process we have to go through to get there. And as we create, and we're going to find where our anchors are, where our hooks are for these larger buyers, so we can create a compelling program and a consistent delivery system that we know, you know, that we're not, because we may get one shot. You know, we get the attention of a large buyer. In my experience, you know, having seen and a part of companies that have been on the ropes with, you know, the likes of Whole Foods or Costco, you get one chance, usually, maybe a second chance if you have something really compelling. So there's some proving ground that we have to do, and I think that's really going to be in the more friendly, independent, smaller markets that we approach first. And that's kind of how we're setting this up. And it'll be more manageable for our supply chain as well initially. Not that we will turn away opportunities. I mean, there's been some opportunities that have started to come our way, you know, with a large university in the Boston area, for example, you know, where we're seeing some demand for a mix of grab and go, and because they have these initiatives, you know, where it's buy X% of local products. And, you know, while we've seen some of those opportunities work out for the Food Hub network here in Vermont, seeing those come from a place like Boston is, we certainly don't want to turn that down. The opportunity to at least be at the table for those discussions. So there's going to be a little bit of mix of this proactive, strategic market entry and perhaps reactive, here we go, let's take advantage of this opportunity right now. So.
And that's one of the things we know about a business plan or a strategic plan. It's all great and perfect until you engage with the public and your target. And then you find out what you got wrong by how much and in which direction. And there's really no substitute for being out in the world talking to people and gathering that market intelligence. You know, gathering market intelligence is fancy talk for having conversations with a lot of people and learning what they need. And if this is successful, what Vermont Way Foods will be able to do is spend time places that the Vermont food hubs and that Vermont farmers and small producers can't afford to spend their time on their own. But as an ambassador and as a market intelligence organization, we can go out and find out what people want, what people need, what they're willing to pay, and then translate that into consistent improved farm gate revenue and gross margin, strengthening farms, helping farms diversify what they offer with access to market that doesn't have to be invented every time. And what I think one of the biggest learning exercises for Matt and his team over the next year is going to be, what do small producers need to be successful using this channel? And be interested in hearing about that from folks. Ellen, I see you got your hand. Oh.
Hey, Lawrence, I have one more thing I wanted to add to that. Sorry, just really quick. It's also of note that we are really cognizant of the risk involved in approaching a larger buyer and creating a situation where there's dependency. And, you know, I've been in meetings with the likes of Kroger. I should maybe didn't name people, but large players where, you know, you're in a discussion and they're saying, well, maybe these 5 categories we have to go away from you on. You look at the numbers, you know, during that meeting, quickly doing the math on your little scratch pen, and you're like, well, that's $20 million worth of sales, you know, and it's just that percentage of business that, you know, a large player can bring can just as easily be taken away. So I think that we're cognizant of the diversification strategy on the customer side is quite critical to this as well. So I just wanted to say that because I know it's easy to see the big carrots and they can be great partners to working with a large buyer, but certainly as a risk strategy if we become too dependent. So our intent is to have a diversified approach.
Yeah, concentration risk is huge. And that's one of the benefits that an aggregating entity has as well, because concentration risk on the customer end is a risk, and concentration risk on the supplier end is a risk, particularly with exposure to microclimates around Vermont. You know, we need we need redundancy, and we need the benefit of overlapping. That means also that we need additional additional purchasing outlets in addition to those highest value export markets, domestic export markets, to make sure that we consistently drive waste out of the system and don't have as much food waste as the modern distribution system has created. Ellen, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just, I'm curious, as you did the research for this process, did you guys talk to Angel and Michael at Red Tomato to get a sense of how it is that they operate? Because just for those that don't know, one of the things that they do with their brand is they're aggregating across a lot more mid-sized than the smallest, but then they go to say, negotiate for an annual contract price with Trader Joe's or with King's or wherever. And they're doing the aggregation and doing cross-docking and such, but they're actually doing the negotiations on the price point and trying to get the best value and best price for the farmers that they're aggregating up into. So I was just curious if that's part of your model and whether or not what you learned from if you talk to them.
Matt, why don't you, I don't know whether you talked to Red Tomato or not, but why don't you go ahead and answer the question?
Answer that. Actually, we have been playing a little bit of back and forth, but I think that is my intent, hopefully to sit down with the folks from Red Tomato. But to your point, yeah, that's one of the reasons where floor price is so important to understand, is that I do believe part of this role will be going to assess where the market actually is and what it will bear. And then there may be a conversation about what's actually worthwhile for the producer, because that's real. And that happens. And sometimes those types of relationships just don't work for everybody, and that's okay. And that's why we need a diversity of options and outlets. But they can be very valuable for volume. But, as far as the margin dollar return, that's a discussion and a give and take and part of the negotiation process. So yeah, our intent would be to operate in that manner, but only first understanding what is the threshold of the product we're representing and what's viable, because we want to hold it up.
We've got just a few minutes left before we give people a break, before inviting people to move over for closing marks and reflections, and have a few minutes between these two things. One of the things that I've found really interesting about these conversations is that while we're having the conversation about the Vermont brand and exporting Vermont food, there's a broader conversation about regional self-sufficiency in the food system, how states interrelate. And we certainly have short seasons here, and we don't have an ocean. And so there's full trucks going away. They probably won't be coming back empty. And this context, I think, is an important one to think about. Gay, you've spent a lot of time thinking about this context and Vermont Way Foods within the regional system. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Lawrence, I was just writing a question to you. So can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, I was saying, we've been talking about Vermont Way Foods as an export tool. We've also got full trucks going out of state, and we don't want empty trucks coming back, and we don't have an ocean. And we're having this conversation about Vermont domestic export. At the same time, there's a big conversation going on around New England regional food self-sufficiency, coming out of COVID, coming out of all of these pieces coming together. And I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about that, as well as supporting this initiative. Could you talk a little bit about the Way context within that regional conversation?
Well, I can, but I see Paul from Food Connects and I bet he could do a lot better job than I could, because I see in many respects that it's Food Connects that has that sensitivity to and access to thinking about, for example, the East. I'm not even going to get the names right, but there's the Northeast Coalition of Food Processors. There's the East Coast Food Hub Collective that's talking about could Food Connects come back with strawberries from South Carolina, small farms, in April, and so or seafood from the coast. So I don't know, Paul, if you feel better able than I am to think or respond to that question. But I do see that potential as part of this, but I think it's from that southeast corner of the state that will happen.
Thanks, Gay. You're absolutely right. It is a sensitivity of ours, as we don't want empty trucks coming back. We need to make this as efficient as possible. I don't know if there's anyone else from Food Connect who would like to add anything to that, or Matt, and particular conversations you've had with Richard. But it's definitely something we're working through.
Catherine?
Yeah, I think I have some real life examples of how we're able to import product and increase access to Vermonters and help fill those trucks. And so this group of 4 food hubs has been working together for many years. And for the past couple of years, we've done this thing that we call hub-to-hub transactions. And so it's, products that Farm Direct might have access to, that Food Connects wants for their customer base. They're sourcing through us to sell to their customer. And so Food Connects And the logistics behind it, I do not know, but Food Connects has access to Red's Best Seafood, and we don't, being up here in the far reaches of the kingdom, but it is an attractive product for our customers. And so we, contract with the CAE to do our distribution. And so the CAE is bringing food down from farm direct producers or Just Cut or wherever down to Brattleboro, and at the same time picking up Red's Best and bringing it back up to Hardwick so that farm direct can sell it in our markets in northern Vermont. And so I think, we just need to take, those real life examples and go even further and identify more products that will help us do those hub to hub transactions and save fuel and less trucks on the road and all of those good things. So I think we're doing it on a micro level already within Vermont and within our networks, but certainly have laid the groundwork to expand even further and impact the regional system.
Thank you. Gay, I'll give you the closing question to John.
Well, I wondered if John could talk about just how, what is of the many things that keep you up at night, how ready are the food hubs to meet the growing demand if the market responds as we hope it will? The projections here are pretty dramatic to grow the amount of food we're selling, and just what is it going to take for, I think of this as a challenge primarily with respect to Food Connects and CAE, because you're where the infrastructure is primarily focused. So could you talk about that?
Well, I would say, in all fairness, we have a long ways to go to be ready to be at the ultimate end scale that Vermont Way Foods is projecting. I mean, just this morning, a group of us were having a conversation around the cost of getting a truck from Hardwick to, Boston metro area and back, and what that looked like, and, what the, real life pallet rates would need to be. And so, I mean, we're working on this. And I think that, as a collective group of hubs, we've identified, well, first of all, as a collective group, we've also, and with obviously the support of High Meadows, have gone out and raised a tremendous amount of money for this project. And I want to thank all of the funders out there who have participated in all of the funds that have been raised to sort of launch this effort. Phase 2 of that is a larger fundraising effort around infrastructure, and that is a much bigger lift. There are pieces of that coming together. Our intention is to move into additional space in the new Hardwick Yellow Barn Business Accelerator building. I know Food Connects is looking at space and what their needs are. So is Intervale, and we're obviously in conversations closely with Green Mountain Farm to School. But no, we definitely need to scale and to be ready. And also, we have partners like Myers Produce who, we share a warehouse with them, and they're already going to Boston metro area. So, I think it's really looking at what we need to be efficient. I'll also say, just as a closing remark, that we as a state, I think, have a long way to go around infrastructure, especially as our ag economy diversifies further away from dairy. Dairy farmers have had to invest basically in a bulk tank. And a truck has come and picked up their milk, every other day or every day, depending on the size of the farm. And as we, grow, our ag economy, whether it's root crops or grains or meat or, value-added dairy, we're seeing real bottlenecks and challenges at the producer level around aggregation facilities, storage facilities, processing facilities, distribution mechanisms. So I don't think it's an issue just at the hub level. It's across Vermont. A lot of our producers who are looking at these new enterprises are realizing that it's going to require a tremendous amount of infrastructure So that's a plug for all of us to go out and talk to our legislators around how they want to spend these dollars coming into Vermont and for what purpose. And we can talk about the local food system, the dollars that it brings back to Vermont and the producers, and you know, our working landscape. So it's a daunting scope of work for sure.
You know, and as you say that, I just remember how many different ribbon cuttings I've been to, where all the bankers are patting themselves on the back, and then the entrepreneur is standing there shell-shocked after everybody leaves, because everybody who's there thinks they've just cut the ribbon at the finish line, and the person doing the work realizes they've just cut the ribbon at the starting line. And that's where we are. We're at the starting line, and I want to thank everybody for coming today. There's a tremendous amount that's gone into this, but there is a tremendous amount to go, and there's a real opportunity for all of you to contribute ideas and to contribute clear expectations about what you need for this organization to do to help your part of the food system be successful. Not just help Vermont Way Foods be successful, but how Vermont Way Foods can help you. And these folks are ready to listen. So thank you very much. At 4:35, we're going to switch over to closing remarks and reflections. The link is in the chat. What I'd invite you to do is open the chat, click on that link, and then go grab a snack, use the restroom, grab a beer, whatever you want for that closing session, and it'll be up on your screen when you come right back. Don't go away completely. So thank you all very much. Matt, Carol, Catherine, John, Gay, thank you for the time you spent preparing and delivering today. Have a great evening all.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Do you have power back, Lawrence?
The light in the dining room is still off behind me, so we'll see. It lasted long enough. That's why there's a battery backup in this office.
Good for you. I've got to get me one of those.
Thanks.
Right. Thank you for everything.
Thank you. Bye-bye.